and if you really think what the administration is doing about ICE, what they're projecting and what they want to project is that this is a military operation and we're above the law. What you see is what you see, but you're going to have to believe the opposite because we're telling you to believe the opposite. And it's the reverse in the Renee Good. It's like what you see here is questionable. And that's the sense in which it's a loyalty test.
The killing of Renee Good in Minnesota at the hands of an ICE agent further revealed the tribal divide in America. What does this mean for the rule of law and the future of America? Welcome to the Ayn Rand Institute podcast. My name is Agustina Vergara and with me is Onkar Ghate. So, Onkar, over the last few weeks since January 7th, which was when Renee Good was killed at the hands of an ICE agent, we have been watching footage and seeing all this debate around what happened when she was killed. So we have video of the killing from many different angles, and we'll share in the show notes a link to the New York Times that did an article with the synchronized video, all the footage synchronized into one video and showing what happened. And we're all looking at the same thing, analyzing this video, but there's this divide among people on what the video actually shows and whether the ICE agent was let's say justified to shoot her 3 times. Apparently it seems it was actually 4 times, and whether the killing was justified. And some people, including the Trump administration, say that the shooting was justified because the agent shot her in self-defense and that she was actually trying to run him over. So by shooting her, he saved his life and the life of the other agents. And other people, there's like some nuance and differences in different ways that people see it, but others, including myself, think that the shooting was completely unjustified, that Renee Good was actually trying to escape the ICE agent, not run him over, and that basically my position at the moment is that there is no universe in which one could conclude that this was justified at all, or even this may be a little bit debatable too, but I don't think one can give the agent the benefit of the doubt about what happened there. And I don't think he did this in self-defense. And I think that he actually shot to kill. And I can say more about why I think this, but what is your view about what happened that day?
So I've watched the video. I've watched the sort of the reconstruction or the knitting together of videos from different angles. I've actually watched, there's video for about I don't know what it is, 6 to 10 minutes after the shooting. I think all of it, when you watch it, should be highly disturbing. That's different when you say it's not justified. To me, there's a big difference between if this was investigated and to the standard that agents are held to, would this be viewed legally as an unjustified shooting, or would it be viewed as, no, this was legal, he acted reasonably, and reasonably in this context, I've read a bit, I'm certainly no expert on the legal issues here, but, and of what counts as self-defense for an officer and so, but it's a pretty low standard. I think it can be understandable why it's low. When you think of particularly the police, and there's reason to not think of the ICE agents as police, and we should talk about that, I think. But if you think just more broadly that what the law will be ICE agents, police, they're often in dangerous situations where they have to make split-second decisions. And you can't have a standard, or it would be wrong legally to have a standard where you're watching video 8 times, and then you maybe even watch it in slow motion and think, well, what should they have done? And so that's not the reality. Like that's what it is. It's Monday morning quarterbacking. Yeah, you can watch the tape and think, but you can't hold the agent to that standard. So what counts as reasonable is it's fairly low because they're in dangerous situations where they have to make split-second decisions. And it doesn't even mean every agent would have done the same thing in those circumstances. So reasonable could mean, yeah, 9 out of 10 agents wouldn't have shot. but one did, and he was scared and he feared for his life. So my guess is if this was investigated, it would satisfy the legal requirements. And in that sense, so if unjustified means if it was investigated, it would clearly be labeled an unjustified shooting by the agent from a legal standpoint. I'm dubious to it, but like I'm certainly no expert. You would have to look at all the evidence. This is part of the argument of why it should be investigated. And we should talk about that as well, the fact that it looks like it will not be investigated. So, but having said that, I still find it deeply disturbing. And part of the context one has to think about is just what these ICE agents are, what they're doing, and the fact that they're not acting like police. And I think there's been a deep reason why they're not acting like police. But if you ask, were they trying to de-escalate the situation? I think the answer has to be no. I would think even like from watching the footage, it projects too much. They're itching for a fight. So they're looking for a reason to escalate. Not so police supposedly are trained to de-escalate situation, and they should be trained in the sense that they're among civilians, and what they're supposed to be doing is like the slogans to serve and protect. It's the population is not your enemy. This is too much like a military operation, and I actually think in the end that's one should think more of ICE agents as they're like military soldiers than they're police. Um, and there it's confrontational. You can wonder, why is the agent walking around with a cell phone, um, walking around the car? Um, like that doesn't project it. You're very scared in this situation. Um, I don't know what he's doing. Is he just taking footage? They're doing a lot of facial ID. Is that what he's doing? Um, I don't know. Why does he position himself in front of the car? So all of that makes it seem like there's a kind of, as I put it, like an itching for a fight. And that should be disturbing if one thinks, yeah, that's what these agents are doing. Um, like there was no reason, I think, to think of her as threatening. Maybe once the car's driving, but in the lead up to that, you might find her, she's a nuisance. You might think she's getting in the way of their operations, so they could detain her or something. It's not like we need to shoot her. So, and then the aftermath I actually find the aftermath of what happens even more disturbing. So I think like that from a moral perspective and from thinking of how the government should be operating, it's deeply disturbing.
Yeah, I want to talk about the aftermath, but also, and I think the first part of the aftermath is the whole attitude of the ICE agent. I think I agree with you. It's one that they're trying to create conflict and to pick up a fight. Um, I honestly I don't see how one can argue in any reasonable way that he tried. So essentially the threat was supposed to be the car. She was allegedly trying to run him over. And how is it that you think that shooting a driver is going to stop the car? Not you, Onkar, meaning in general. How is shooting the the driver going to stop the car? That's not going to do it. In fact, the car is probably going to, go further out of control if you shoot the driver, as it did when she gets shot, and then she loses complete control of the car, and the car crashes into a different car, and then I think it crashes into a pole. So, and then not only that, but to shoot her 4 times, that is making sure you're killing this person. Um, so what I don't understand is how there can be, and then like the first part of the aftermath is when he shoots her, she loses control of the car, and he insults her after after he shoots her, showing this sort of attitude and disdain, like saying something like, I you got what you deserve, essentially, like that sort of attitude. So
Yeah, so too has to be investigated. I know a number, I think it was the New York Times that is sort of the source for this, that they did audio analysis, and they think it is the, um, uh, what's his name? Ross is the person saying that. But that's again what an investigation, it would look into all these things and what can be established as a fact. But yeah, that's part of what could, but what you do, what is, even regardless of what he says, um, what you see him do in the aftermath of the video is go look into the car. Um, what he would have seen is this person, Good, bleeding. The allegations now, and I think again this was New York Times, is that she was alive at that time. Um, and he look, it's what he projects is, I mean, the most charitable is a callous indifference to this. It's, oh, yeah. It's he doesn't call 911. He doesn't seem concerned. He doesn't stay. He just walks away. He tells some other people, "Oh, you should call 911." Like, oh, his job is done here. Um, a police shooting, you would think, would be, even when it's like you're dealing with a real criminal, which there was no reason to think that you're trying to track down. It's not pleasant to shoot another person. It's not like, and this is why, like, the police often go on leave after a shooting and so on. Usually there's an investigation, but it's traumatic for the officer and there's no projection of that at all. And then a minute or two later, he drives away. And I mean, as many people have said, like, this is a crime scene. Like, isn't that he gets in his SUV and drives away. Like, isn't that altering a crime scene? And that's part of what, like, if you watch it from a moral perspective, to think that this is deeply disturbing, that's part of it. You said about the shooting, e- from a governmental point of view, you would hope that the police are not trained like this. So there's a difference again between saying, so that would make it legally unjustifiable. From the reading I've done, I doubt even that would make it. Maybe it would, like, it should be investigated. But if you ask, do you want police in this kind of situation? I think, and I mean, many police have said this. He could so clearly jump out of the way. So as you're saying, but between shooting to kill the driver as though that stops a car versus it just careens off, and trying to get out of the way, you would hope they're training to try to get out of the way. Um, that's not true in a military context necessarily, but that's part of what I find disturbing about it. So people have brought up, oh, but isn't it relevant that it seems like there was an incident 6 months ago where this officer was dragged by a car? And you might think that is relevant in the sense that, well, like, he panicked. This is what he shouldn't have done this, or like he did this too easily. It's against his training. But this episode, no, you might think something like that. But also relevant is he's a past soldier. I think he was in Iraq, and if you put someone like that and you don't give them adequate training, and you have this whole atmosphere that the civilians in any so that so people civilians in the U.S. who are in any way critical of ICE, you make it like they're the enemy, um, that you're gonna get something like this. I think there's ample reason to think you'll get incidents like this, and what they project is too much like the citizens are the enemy. And I would put here just, I mean, there's a lot to talk about here, but to just think of what the administration is doing and the contempt for the rule of law. Like, I don't think you can see the shooting in isolation. But again, I think the legal investigation, part of the way it works, is they treat the shooting in isolation, sort of second by second. So my guess is legally, he would not be held accountable. Um, but as I say, that is a guess. But if you project what the administration, and if you really think what the administration is doing, about ICE. What they're projecting and what they want to project is this is a military operation, um, and we're above the law. The Christy Nome, who I mean, it was widely reported, and people, at least some people, were horrified by it. And I think you should have been horrified by it, of her posing in front of the El Salvadorian, um, uh, uh, I
Sikot.
mean, it's yeah, no, I was gonna it's close to a gulag. I mean, it's calling it a prison. None of our prisons should be like this. Um, so posing there as like it's a glamour shot. This is whatever you think of El Salvador, you can't think what you have there is rule of law. And the project it's like you have an authoritarian government that does whatever the hell it wants. And even if you have a view like El Salvador has descended into such hell that you need an authoritarian government to round up the gangs. And yeah, there is no due process. There's no real legal framework. But to make that seem like that's what we want in America is such a contempt for the rule of law, for America. And that's the whole projection of what ICE is doing. And I think that the shooting has to be seen in that context.
Yeah, I'll say briefly about the PTSD that the agent had PTSD allegedly because he was dragged by a car a few months ago during an ICE raid too. I mean, to me, that's not even. I mean, I think JD Vance is the one who said that, and to me, that is not even like. There's no way he thinks that is a justification because why is a person with PTSD on the field carrying a gun around cars, which apparently is what kind of like sort of triggered the PTSD in the first place? Why is he out in the streets trying to allegedly enforce the law? So knowing that there are hostile situations, that it's high stakes, they can be, there can be protesters and people trying to get on his way. Why is he there with a gun if he has PTSD? I mean, I'm not an expert at all in these sort of things, but it seems to me at least very questionable that if it's true that he should have been there, out there doing this. Um,
But that again is it's a projection of we're above the law. So that's a kind of that you would think about that of like this is these if you thought of them like police, like do we put a policeman out there? Isn't this jeopardizing the citizens? And so, but the more it's you think of it, well, this is a soldier in enemy territory. Okay, yeah, like maybe he's going to shoot a little too easy. So, but it doesn't have the same ramifications in your mind. So the fact that he would bring that up, and I agree with it, and he brings it up, and as though this is obviously um, on the side of ICE, like, oh, yeah, this is PTSD, so like, get out of our way is part of what it projects, and that like that's not what a police in America should be doing. So the fact that it doesn't they don't even think when they tweet it out that, this could look bad, um, is that captures part of the mentality here.
and so shortly after the shooting, I think a couple of hours, the Department of Homeland Security expressed on Twitter that, and I quote, in an act of domestic terrorism, an anti-ICE rioter weaponized her vehicle against law enforcement. Our officer relied on his training and saved his own life as well as the lives of his fellow officers. So this was very shortly after the shooting. So there wasn't any time for investigations, that everything was still unclear. We didn't have, obviously, most of the footage that we have now. So it would have been very hard for everyone, including, the administration, including people who are against ICE and everything, to reach a conclusion, about what happened, whether this was a terrorist, whether she weaponized the vehicle, whether he's tried to save his own life. But the administration immediately came out in essentially what I think is blind support of the agent. Blind because there was nothing to see. They couldn't have reached. There was nothing there to see yet to reach a conclusion about the driver, about Renee Good, or about the ICE agent himself. And everyone in the government echoed the statement by DHS And everyone came out to defend the agent, including Trump himself, even after more of the footage came out. And even like JD Vance spent a really long time on Twitter and elsewhere, because he even there was even like sort of like a press conference with him, defending the agent and condemning Good, including by calling her a deranged leftist, and saying that the agent, like we said, were suffering from PTSD. And also, he said that ICE agents have, as he called it, absolute immunity, and that the administration stands behind them essentially no matter what. So I obviously, I mean, just you and I are within, like, among us, kind of debating about, okay, what happened. It's not clear, and we're having this conversation, but the administration didn't seem to need any conversation at all or any sort of reflection about what happened. And a couple of days ago, even Todd Blanche came out to say that there won't even be any investigation at all on the shooting. And we have the video of him saying this.
The Department of Justice doesn't just stand up and investigate because some congressman thinks we should, because some governor thinks that we should. We investigate when it's appropriate to investigate. And that is not the case here. It wasn't the case when it happened, and it's not the case today.
So the administration is not going to launch any sort of investigation. And I find this extremely unusual, because after law enforcement kills someone, usually in the immediate aftermath, you don't have any police department or any agency or any government officials coming out, blindly defending the law enforcement officer that committed the shooting. And they do not rush to, call the shooter, the victim, any names, or rush to judge what happened. There is usually a statement that says, that acknowledges that something happened, and then there is an investigation that is launched immediately after into the event. And, I've often heard, because obviously in America there's many instances of police misconduct, and I even hear, well, but sometimes the same police department carries investigation and it's not really reliable. But even then, even if these investigations, on misconduct sometimes could be faulty, there is at least some sort of formality of an investigation, or of a formality of at least pretending to have some sort of concerns for the rights violations of the victim, especially if the victim was killed. And none of that happened here. And I'm having a really hard time understanding how this is just not, how this is even possible in America. I'm not even sure what to think of it, Onkar. What do you think of this?
Well, that's one of many things to think of why ICE is not the police. So, Harry Binswanger, who's on the Ayn Rand Institute board of director, had a very good article. It's on his Substack. We can link to it in the show notes, about why one should not think of ICE as law enforcement. And part of the argument there, in effect, is, I'll put it a little bit differently, I think, than was in the article, is that the police are part of the American government, and crucial to the American government is separation of powers. And the article then goes into what that means. But part of what it means is you've got three branches. The legislature sets what the laws are. Police are part of the execution. They're the part of the executive branch of the execution of the laws. And the courts are sitting over, in a sense, examining both what the legislature is doing, and are they passing laws that are in accordance, that are constitutional, that are in accordance with the Constitution, not in violation of the Constitution. And for the executive branch, is then the executive branch wielding the powers that have been delegated to it, or is it abusing those powers in something? And it might even be inadvertently abusing, but that the court sits in judgment of that. And here, when you had ICE is, I think the way that Dr. Binswanger put it in the article, it's like the enforcement agents of an administrative agency. And so calling them agents in part captures that. And that is too much. They set the rules, they then execute on the rules, and then they judge if they followed the rules or not. That's what happens in an authoritarian regime or in a dictatorship. It cannot happen in the US form of government. So if they're the ones deciding, oh, yeah, there's nothing to investigate here, so we're not even going to investigate anything. And you can look from the outside, like, how is that possible? Can't, like, how are they the ones deciding if this should be investigated or not? And I think that's part of what like you find unbelievable about this. It's how can they be the ones deciding if what they did accorded with the law or not? And how can they be the ones deciding, well, yeah, might open an investigation or we might not open an investigation? And this is the part where the sort of independence of the FBI and the DOJ is a real issue. That, yeah, they're part of the executive branch, but if they make all the decisions about, even like, we're going to open an investigation and so on, then you've got too much that all the parts of the government that should be separate. And the checks and balance in part means one aspect of the government is checking the other aspect of the government. The judicial branch is checking the legislature. The legislature, then, if they don't like a judicial ruling, the way it's interpreted, they can change the law. And so the checks and balances mean that a separation of powers, they're keeping each other in check. And you can ask, who's keeping ICE in check? And it's not clear there's an answer.
Yeah, and like you said, Onkar, immigration courts are part of the executive. It's not actual courts, part of the judiciary, and the executive has complete authority over appointing immigration judges. And in fact, and they don't need to have the training and the expertise of actual judges. In fact, the administration has been, publicizing opening roles for immigration judge, which they fired a lot of immigration judges, and now they're advertising the role as deportation judges. So, like, in the name itself that they're advertising is the result of how you should rule, and obviously, it's these so-called judges are incredibly influential by the executive. But that brings me to a point that I think it's important because, some people argue that Renee Good should have obeyed the commands of the ICE agents, which was a get out of the car. I think it was what they told her. And it is obviously true that she would likely be alive now if she had done that. Like, she likely wouldn't have been shot, presumably, if she had obeyed. But here is a problem I think that many people face when encountering ICE agents. Given how ICE conducts itself and what they do to people once they are detained, and the fact, like you said, Onkar, that they don't actually operate like police, it is actually pretty scary to put oneself at their mercy, right? So essentially, like, if you're detained by ICE and you, even if you comply and obey, you don't know if they, and I'm talking even like as U.S. citizens, I'm not even talking as immigrants, but you don't know what will happen to you. Because even if you comply, if you're carrying your passport card or your passport, you don't know if they will accept that. And there are more and more cases of U.S. citizens who have been detained, often for days, incommunicado, in really bad, conditions. Some of them needing medications that they can't get during days because of this detention, and nobody knows where they are. And this happening often in ICE detention centers. And I have talked to people who are working on the case of, for example, George Redis, who is an American citizen who was detained for 3 days incommunicado because he ran into an ICE checkpoint and there was a protest and whatnot, and he got detained for 3 days. We did a podcast episode with one of the lawyers working on his case a few months ago. So it seems that both alternatives are bad, because escaping law enforcement puts you at risk, of breaking the law in itself, but obviously apparently now also from getting shot or potentially facing charges for obstruction of justice or something like that, which is something that the administration has been doing. But on the other hand, obeying ICE agents may land you in detention with your due process rights completely obliterated. And I know, we were talking about El Salvador and CICAR, which is this, like you said, essentially a gulag where they sent Venezuelan immigrants. But I don't think it is, I mean, the way that people, I think about it, it is not off the table for people who have seen and heard about CICAR, that they may even end up there. I don't think for most people this is off the table. So how should we understand the rule of law and trying to obey the law and trying to have respect for law enforcement when doing so may put you in a situation where you have your rights violated in really obscene ways?
There's a lot to say here. The article of Dr. Binswanger that I referenced, which we'll put in the show notes, has some about this. I think like that's part of what it is. There is a valid meaning that you should respect law enforcement. You should obey sort of reasonable commands that they give. That's part of what's important about thinking, is ICE really law enforcement or not? Because if you think not, then the same considerations don't apply. But and there's a lot to say about the protesters and what is valid and invalid. Like, I'm not on the side of all the I think some of it is valid and should be done. I think it is very good that ICE is being filmed, but there's ways to do that, I think, properly and ways to do it improperly. I do think there's reason to think in this case that they are interfering with what ICE is doing, not in a major way, it doesn't at all excuse. I don't even think it mitigates that they shot her. So that you're engaged in a protest that is deemed illegal doesn't mean you can just go around shooting the protesters now. Um, but so there's things to say about that. But anybody who's looking at the situation and thinks, oh, the officer had reason to fear, but she didn't have reason to fear, again, is not thinking in terms of the wider context of what ICE is actually doing. And it's like, if this is the only video you've watched, you should watch some of the other videos. So there for sure are cases where people are treating ICE agents badly. In this case, there's a little bit of a the sort of provocative, insulting comments directed at the ICE agents. Again, it doesn't justify that they resort to lethal force. It doesn't even justify pulling out their guns. But if you don't see that she might be fleeing because she's scared of being in ICE custody, if you don't watch some of the things where ICE agents are being attacked or police being attacked, like this happened in the LA protest that turned in part into a riot. Police, they are being attacked, and you cannot deny that, I think. But you also cannot deny the way that ICE is so often operating. I mean, one of the most chilling ones, we've talked about this, and I forget what the previous podcast was, but the tough student, Ozturk, it's Ozturk?
Rumeysa Öztürk, yeah.
Yeah. Her crime, and there's not even allegations that there's anything worse than this, is she wrote an op-ed. And she's arrested by plainclothes ICE agents masked. I said at the time, what it reminded me most of was the Charlie Hebdo assassinations. And the reason why is their crime was publishing a magazine. There are people who burst into the offices and shot them dead. How is she supposed to know that she's not being abducted, she's not being carried away, it's not some, she's so it was, but she's Muslim, it's not some Muslim who's a moderate Muslim, and ICE is, ISIS is coming after her And yeah, they don't shoot her dead. They're going to whisk her off to somewhere. They might put her on camera, and they like to do executions on camera. And so, like, how is she supposed to know that that's not what's happening? And in that video, there's bystanders saying, "What are you doing?" "Oh, we're the police." And the bystander rightly says, "You don't look like the police, and you're wearing masks." And if you were like, think of Charlie Hebdo, and this is what happened. The people like this came in, and they don't just shoot you dead. How are they supposed to know? Like, is this the police, or is this now Islamic terrorists who are going to whisk us off somewhere? And you couldn't, like, I think she would have been justified if she was of the people for the Second Amendment and concealed carry. I think she would have been justified in shooting all the agents. And saying, like, what, self-defense? I have no idea what is going on. And it's for writing an op-ed. And then the allegations are, well, they revoked her visa, her student visa. Did anyone tell her they revoked? Did they try, like, the idea that she was a danger, that you need 6 or 7 officers to sneak up on her, and so, like, it's a joke. But unfortunately, it's not a joke because it's terrifying. And then they whisked her off. I think first to Vermont and then to Louisiana. And she can't contact a lawyer. And this is part of what it means. This is not law enforcement. It's not, we read your rights and yet you have a right to remain silent and yet you can talk to a lawyer. It's nothing like that. And if you don't get that, one, that's terrifying for people who are subjected to this, but also that this is like why people would not view these people as law enforcement, but more like thugs who have a government position, but it doesn't change the fact that they're thugs. I think you're just not thinking about what is actually going on.
Yeah, Rumeysa Sturk ended up being detained, I believe, for 3 months. She actually wrote an essay, I think it was for Vanity Fair, about her experience there. And yeah, it's not at all like being detained by the actual police. Like, you don't have a right to an attorney, you don't have a right to a phone call, you may be gone for days and nobody knows where you are. You know, it is not like like a regular detention at all, like in the slightest.
Let me say
So
one other thing about this because it's important. So you said before, this is even happening to citizens. That's relevant to make people care about it,
yeah.
but it's actually irrelevant. So there is an argument. I don't agree with this argument, but there is an argument that sort of customs and border control, when you're at the border, they don't have to abide by normal constitutional requirements because you're not yet in the United States. You're in this kind of no man's land. And we've talked about this before. I've been, so I'm Canadian. I'm still an immigrant. I would not right now interact with the police, and not because I hate all the police and so on, but there's too much arbitrary power. We could talk about that. But so I'm an immigrant. I've had like pre-Trump, when border control was more reasonable, I've been detained. Um, and you have no rights when you're detained. They take your phone away. You can't contact anyone. You can't get any representation. They think they can ask you any questions. And like I'm Canadian, so typically what would have happened if you don't answer questions, you don't cooperate, they'll say, we're not allowing you in. I'd go back to Canada. But they can detain you and not allow you to go back and not allow you in the country. It's a, sort of an area of lawlessness. You can argue that that's the Constitution doesn't reach there. I don't think that's true, but you can't argue that once you're on U.S. soil that the Constitution doesn't reach there. And something like the First Amendment, which in this case of the tough student, is so clearly violated. The First Amendment applies to the government. It makes no distinction between citizens and non-citizens. It's reining in government power on U.S. soil. And it reins it in whether the government is using that power against citizens or against immigrants. And so there's a rhetorical reason to say, oh, but this is even citizens, so you should care. But if you don't care that the U.S. government is using its power in an arbitrary, unconstitutional way, and, oh, I don't care unless it's a citizen, there's something wrong with you.
So Onkar, back to the government's reaction to Renee Good's killing. So these immediately siding with the agent without any shred of evidence for to do so. I found this, like, I think I indicated this before. Like, I find this like surreal. I don't even understand how this can be happening in America. But I also find it as one of the most grotesque examples of tribalism that I've seen lately or have ever witnessed. Probably one, it's right up there. Because I think that the reason that the government comes out like this is because this was one of their guys, and he killed a member of the other tribe without who are the, as Vance put it, something like the leftist lunatics or something like that, right? And so then, because it was one of his people and he attacked and shot one of the members of the other tribe, then, the thing to do is to rush to his defense no matter what. It's like this my tribe, right or wrong type of mentality. So, and I think further proof of that, I mean, I think it's pretty evident that that's what's happening, but further proof of that is, so JD Vance retweets or amplifies a video that the agent was recording with his phone. You mentioned earlier, why was he doing with his phone? Well, we can have a discussion about that, because I don't know if you've seen the article in the Washington Post about the content creation for the DHS. I will send it to you if you haven't seen it. But so he was recording with his video, and Vance shares the video and claims that the video exonerated the agent, but it really didn't, because you see that that the phone starts filming the trees and the sky and whatever when the car turns. But I mean, that could have been anything. It doesn't mean that he actually was run over. But I think what the video tried to show, and the reason why they shared it and they claim, like, under the allegation that it exonerated the agent, was that, first of all, that the video shows that Good and her wife were being defiant and that were verbally confronting the agent. I think her wife said something like, we don't swipe our license plates like you guys. You don't need to film it. You can come talk to us later. It's going to be the same license plate. And then, like, why don't you go get lunch or something like that? And Good tells the agent, I'm not mad at you, or something like that. So they were talking back. I don't think they were being particularly belligerent, but they were talking back and defiant. And the second reason that I think this video was shared by the administration was that it shows that Good was, in fact, with her wife, and that they were gay, and that they were sort of the stereotype of the leftists that the government so dislikes, and that the base that the government talks to dislikes. So I think that highlighting these two factors, women talking back essentially and defying, the agent's authority, and being gay, and this, cliche of leftist activist, I think it's an attempt to place Good in the opposite tribe as the agent and as administration. The leftists, who are something less than human even, and shooting them is okay because they're members of the other tribe and they're trying to destroy us. What's your take on that?
Yes, I found that disturbing. And even if one leaves aside of uh, sort of speculating on why Vance did it, I think it's, given who Vance is and other things that he said, so there's reason to think that may have been why he's doing it. But even if it wasn't, it was certainly taken that way by much of the base, of the people that you can think of as MAGA loyalists or fanatics. That this why do we have to care about her? Why do we have to care that she was shot? She's not really fully human. And so you put it's one of the worst forms of tribalism. If you really stress, like, the worst forms of tribalism, because tribalism is a range of things, from all bad, but some relatively innocuous, to some, like, really evil. And not every tribe has to dehumanize every other tribe. So when you get to that level, that's part of what our identity is. We're good because everyone else is subhuman. Um, that is a really low form of tribalism. So it's a real evil. Like there have been tribes that have lived together, and yeah, like we have our ways of doing things. We don't really like yours. You have your, and like it's a mutual sort of disregard, viewing each other with a little skepticism, but not killing each other. But here, and it fits with the whole administration's rhetoric about uh, the immigrants, and they're all criminals, and it's millions, and they're all a moment away from killing us. And so if we don't do this kind of thing, like these ICE operations, that yeah, there's lawless, but what are you going to do when there's all these killers just right behind every door? The more you activate that, it's yeah, okay, that justifies almost anything. It's part of the administration's everything's an emergency. So yeah, Trump is wielding and the administration wields all kinds of power that, yeah, maybe if we weren't in an emergency, you might object to, but we are in an emergency. And so it fits. That's part of the reason why it's reasonable to think, yeah, that's what JD Vance is doing. It's part of that whole, because they've done so much of dehumanizing that uh, if you don't just find that disturbing, and the and if you couple that with when it's done, when they think it's being done to someone they like, they're apoplectic about it. So when Charlie Kirk was assassinated, it was, don't anybody dare say anything negative about him. There was a real attempt to make him, he's a saint. I don't know if you've read what so it was the House, what resolution they passed that they wanted Democrats to vote on. And many Democrats said, like, yeah, the Charlie Kirk assassination is an abomination. This should not happen in America. I'm not signing this petition, because the petition was, and it was deliberate to make it seem like, oh, so the Democrats couldn't care less that Charlie Kirk was assassinated. But I read what the actual thing was they were asking them to vote on, and it was basically to deify Charlie Kirk, that he did no wrong, he was one of the greatest Americans ever, and so on. And you could have a view, just as like we had with Trump, that the attempted assassination on Trump. My view was, yeah, that is an abomination. Well, everyone should be horrified by that. You should speak out against it. And I think Trump is evil. And those two things you can hold those two together. So if you contrast you have to deify Charlie Kirk. And I think many of Charlie Kirk's ideas were evil. You have to deify him. And then here, like, we're not going to even think about who Renee Good was. Was she a good person? So like what you got with Charlie Kirk was, well, he's got kids and so on. Well, Renee Good has kids. And so that kind of, I mean, again, it's charitable to put it, just callous indifference. It's such an abysmally low form of tribalism that, again, if you are in the midst of these movements, and in this case it's MAGA, but you see the same phenomenon on the radical left, you should really question, like, really, I'm among these people, and I view these people as they're my friends and allies.
So, Onkar, the shooting of Good and the aftermath of it strikes me, not so similar to other shootings or police misconduct or anything, for the reasons that we discussed before, but also because of the tribalism that ensued after, and particularly around the shooting of Ashli Babbitt during January 6th. And because, I mean, there are several similarities here, I think, because here was an incident that was on video for everyone to see. And, we all saw January 6th live, and shortly after we saw the footage that emerged, and including the footage of the shooting of Ashli Babbitt. And we saw how the rioters violently broke into the Capitol and that threatened the life of Congress people and, law enforcement that was at the Capitol. And we all saw this same thing, yet the reaction to it fell pretty much along, tribal lines. So to MAGA, these were patriots, and this was, I think Trump called it a day of love or something like that at the time. And the White House recently published, I think it was earlier this month, they published a January 6th timeline that completely whitewashes the riots. And I invite our listeners to go check it out and to go see the timeline for themselves. We'll put it in the show notes. And there's a lot to unpack on that website. But I think it's important to focus on how the administration portrays the shooting of Ashli Babbitt, because it's going to be relevant as to mark a contrast with how they're treating the shooting of Renee Good now.
Yeah, can I say one thing about that before we look at both the footage and at least a little bit of the website? I'll just say the website is one of the most evil things I've seen an administration do. So putting up a website means this is a carefully considered view. It's not like a tweet in the middle of the night that, okay, maybe it'll be modified or position reversed in 20 minutes or 2 hours. And you put it's a whitewashing. That's, again, I think, charitable. It's a rewriting, and it's deliberate. So you said that the sort of Trump administration, the Republicans, immediately started rewriting January 6th. Some did. Trump was, again, callously indifferent at best to what was going on January 6th. On January 7th or 8th, he called it, this was violent. There was like at least some violence. There's no place for this. The law is going to pursue you and so on. But what started to happen was some part of the MAGA base engaged in conspiracy fantasies about, no, that's not what January 6th, and what you saw on TV, that's not really the story. And you got that now repeated and growing. And then you got someone like Tucker Carlson repeating all this BS. And what happened, I think probably first it was Trump. Oh, okay, so to keep my base and to keep my political power, I've got to say something completely different about January 6th than what actually happened. So then he started doing it. And then you saw gradually, there's many Republicans, when you see their like public statements in the House after January 6th, because they then were able to do the vote, condemning Trump. And then you get 6 months, a year and a half later, they've completely changed their tune. They have no explanation for it. And you had, when we were talking about this before, you had put it like, it seems like they're gaslighting us, in the sense we all saw this, and now they're telling us what you don't really see this on what you saw on camera. No, that's not really what happened. And even like in the Renee Good shooting, you can think of it like what Trump said immediately after and posted on Truth Social, what Noam said to me. Like, you watched it, that's not anything. Like, she was willfully trying to mow down the cop who was a minute from dying. Like, he was hit, and like if you read Trump's statement about it, it's all made up. And you could say that it's like gaslighting, but I think it's worse than that. So gaslighting is you're sort of say you didn't really see that, and so to make the person doubt themselves. That's part of that's it's worse. That's all. Like, to gaslight somebody is really bad. This is worse. What it is a loyalty test. What it is, yeah, and in effect, it's, are you going to be loyal to your own eyes and mind, or are you going to be loyal to Trump? And the easiest way to know what's happening for a person is give them something obviously irrational that you cannot believe apart from suspending your reason. And are you willing to suspend your reason and be loyal to me? And Trump is transparent in what the one characteristic that he prizes is loyalty, and that means blind loyalty in advance. Oh, I want a blank check. Anything I do, you have to be okay with. And I don't know if you followed the Marjorie Taylor Greene thing of her. Someone told me, which I think this is accurate, when she started splitting from Trump and then she's going to leave the government, it said, it looks like she's coming out of a cult. And I think that's accurate. Like, she started to look more reasonable. And how it's possible, because she's a pretty unreasonable person, to put it well, how it's possible when you look at the whole administration and you start thinking, okay, yeah, Trump makes up, it's arbitrary, made up thing after made up thing. Stephen Miller is evil. Noam is evil. J.D. Vance will, it's a, to use Hillary Clinton's term, which I think is apt here, wasn't true of Americans, but it's apt for the administration. It's a basket of deplorables. And how you can have Marjorie Taylor Greene starting to look like she's the sane one. But if you think, part of how a cult works is what you require is blind, unreasoning loyalty. And the proof that that person has given you that loyalty is to put something in front of them that they know is wrong, they know is untrue, and will you do it anyway? And that is the whole, it's part of why it's right to think of this as a authoritarian, dictatorial, and even fascist, that we're moving in that direction, because I think that is what the meaning of it is. When they tell you things that are obviously, is not true, and you're to believe it anyway. And this is how religions work. So, and this is how Christianity worked. In Christianity, in trying to stamp out the reason, science, math discovered by the Greeks and then some continued and used by the Romans, to stamp that out, it would be what faith meant is you have to embrace the irrational and the contradictory. Something like the Trinity. There's a reason the Trinity implicates God is 3 in 1. Don't say he's just 3. That's blasphemy. You're a heretic if you say. Don't say he's just 1. He's both 1 and 3. And proof of your submission, but here it means submission of, yeah, I've left my mind aside, is, okay, yeah, I'll accept that. He's 3 and 1. And it's that, and mafias do this, gangs do this, this is more in terms of action than belief, but it's the same phenomenon. Your initiation into a gang is to start doing things you know to be wrong. Steal a pack of gum from the corner store. Are you going to do that? Okay. Yeah, now you're starting to become one of us. Steal this woman's purse. Okay, we'll do that. Shoot this person. We're not going to tell you why you're shooting it, what they've done, but loyalty is, we're telling you, do it. And it serves as an initiation, because they know, yeah, when a person's ready to suspend their moral judgment completely like that, then we've got them. They're going to, and that's what is going on. So it's not gaslighting; it's loyalty test. So I think it mostly is deliberate. Will you say you believe what you clearly did not see, and you saw the opposite?
So I think one example of this is the characterization of what happened to Ashli Babbitt in the January 6th riots, and how the administration portrays it on the website. So let's watch the video of the shooting of Ashli Babbitt. So that video shows what happened, and there are a couple of angles even of that video, of that event available online. And then how the administration puts it on this January 6th timeline is they have like a specific point of the timeline for Ashli Babbitt, and it says tragedy at the Capitol. Ashli Babbitt murdered in cold blood. Unarmed Air Force veteran and Trump supporter Ashli Babbitt is fatally shot by Capitol Police Lieutenant Michael Byrd without warning as she climbs through a broken window towards the Speaker's lobby. No weapon was found on her, and she posed no threat. Byrd faced no charges. 3 other Americans were also killed: Roseanne Boylan, Kevin Greason, and Benjamin Phillips. 0 law enforcement officers lost their lives. And given the footage that we just watched, I would challenge anybody to make an actual argument for how she, in this mob, in the context of this mob and what they were doing, posed no threat. And how is the police officer who, because they're trying to break into, it wasn't really a window, it was a door, a glass door, how they were pushing and pushing and pushing, and they were trying to get in there. And then Ashli Babbitt is the first one of the mob that is trying to cross the door through the broken glass. And that's when the agent shoots her. I don't see how anybody can make an actual argument for how she posed no threat. That's just one example of how I think this description of the event by administration completely rewrites what happened. What else would you say about that, Onkar?
Well, part of it, of thinking of this as a loyalty test, I think it's, if you think of it in part, and this was published this month, so this is not some past statement. If you think of this in juxtaposition with what they immediately said and want their base to believe about the Renee Good shooting, it's not a reason, like, that's putting it in it's not a reasonable position. It's completely irrational. Let me put it that way. To have one view of the Renee Good shooting, the officer obviously feared for his life. It was a justified shooting. Every officer should have shot like this. And to not think that Beard, in the case of the January 6th, that it was unreasonable for him to think that he feared for his life and to shoot, that you can't hold those two together. And that's part of the point. As a loyalty test is, yeah, you can see with your own eyes that these two incidents, at best, you might think they're similar. I think the Ashli Babbitt is way worse. Like, there's way more reason to think that they barricaded the doors. They're smashing the doors. They're trying to get through. It's a mob, which is not obviously mentioned in this post on the Trump administration's website. So he has his gun drawn and hasn't shot. They're filming it, that he has his gun drawn. If you don't think, well, maybe we should back up and try to de-escalate. No, we're going to keep, as a mob, pounding on the door. And you think, oh yeah, it's unreasonable to think the officer feared for his life. And notice what so they don't mention the mob. The website says she's unarmed, as though a mob can't kill someone unless everybody has a gun. No, but you can't. If you think a moment for it, you can't believe that. But if you watch the footage or rewatch, it's like they've got something like an axe or whatever that they're using to break open the door. You can't use that on someone's head and it won't kill them. It's deliberately, yeah, what you see is what you see, but you're going to have to believe the opposite because we're telling you to believe the opposite. And it's the reverse in the Renee Good. It's like, what you see here is questionable. There should at least be an investigation. No, there's nothing to question here. There should be no investigation. And that's what you have to believe. And that's the sense in which it's a loyalty test. And to get how far this goes, I've seen law professors write about this, of well, the Ashli Babbitt, well, she didn't have a weapon. And so completely leaving aside, there was a mob here, that you can kill a person. Like you could choke one person, could kill another person without any weapon. Um, and but that's the sense in which it's, yeah, okay, there's a party line here, and to show my loyalty, I'm going to make up things and pretend I didn't see what I didn't see. And when you reach that level, it's anybody who submits to loyalty tests doesn't balk at it. Like the first moment you get that someone's putting a loyalty test to me, that I've got to believe something that I know isn't true in order to maintain the loyalty, that your attitude should be, that person is trying to foist on me something unbelievably evil, which I will not submit to. You could try to force me to do this, but I'm not going to willingly submit to this. And that, like, the whole website has it, but just thinking of it, the website in conjunction with this, and to think of the administration from, they're doing both. So they immediately will tell a story that they have no reason to believe is true about Renee Good, and they will tell you this story about the Ashli Babbitt shooting. And like, I think in a rational person's mind, they should have zero credibility. You should view everything they say as it's arbitrary. They're not interested in whether it's true. They're not interested that you think it's true. They're interested in you believe it because they've told you to believe it.
Onkar, let's close with this. Obviously, tribalism is not the exclusive province of the Trump administration. Previous administrations, Republican and Democratic as well, have engaged in incredibly disgusting tribalism. And I think that the Trump administration is the next step in a long trend of tribalism, political tribalism in this country. But that is completely opposite to the values that this country was founded on, essentially the principle of individual rights. And America is rooted in the rejection of authoritarianism and people telling us what to do, how to think, how to behave, right? So I see so many people in America welcoming and engaging in this just tribalism, again, on both sides, on both like the left and the right. And so I worry about what this means, and this escalation in the tribalism means for the future of this country. Some days I see people on all the tribes acting in ways that I think, I think that maybe this American experiment, so to speak, is just coming to an end, because this is such a rejection of everything we were supposed to stand for and everything that's good about America. So what would you say will happen next? Are we in a course that is completely irreversible, or how are we moving forward now?
I don't think it's irreversible, but it is. I mean, this is part of what I wrote about in the immediate aftermath of Trump's election in 2016. I think part of the meaning of that election is that there is, on sort of a growing number of Americans, but this like means aside, not like 1%. A growing number of Americans are comfortable with and indeed welcome an authoritarian dictatorial regime. And that's true of the people who supported BLM and the riots. And so it's true of a significant portion of Trump's base. Part of what I referenced in that article is one of the most disturbing surveys that came out during like the election period was the number of Americans who, to the question, do we need a leader who will say and do anything, not will do anything constitutional, will say and do anything, in effect, to save us? It was a sizable, it's still a minority of the population, but a sizable minority on Democrats, Republicans, and either said, yeah, we agree, or we somewhat agree with that? And that's basically the question, if you think of it in a political context, is would you accept a dictator who says or does anything as long as what you like what he's saying and doing? But it's like wielding total power. And it was a lot of Americans was, yeah, I think we're in such bad shape that I would accept that. And so we're certainly on that path. It's not inevitable. And th- for it not to be inevitable, people have to think and have to want to think. And if we put it in the just a little bit of the concretes of this situation, and we said we come back to the issue of the protest, there's ample reason to protest ICE. That's not to say that everything, and this is part of what it would mean to think about it. It's not to say that um, everything ICE is doing is illegitimate. It is true that there are the criminals who have come in. It is true that the Biden administration immigration policy was a disaster in a different way, uninterested in the rule of law. So there's many things to object in regard to that. There's some understanding of why people would think, yeah, but we've got all these criminals. It's not true the way Trump portrays it, but the ICE can point to, like, we've detained this kind of person who is a real criminal and this kind of person, but they're also detaining all kinds of people who aren't. And you have to be able to see both things. You can protest one and acknowledge the other. And then when protesting, you really it should be peaceful. You should not be disrupting um, the operations. There's a difference between filming them, and a government should be transparent. And it is a travesty that these agents are masked and so on, and that people are filming, like trying to not let the government get away with that. I'm on the side of that if it really is done peacefully. But there's the so that what the demand really should be is that the government return to rule of law, not a rule of brute force, which is what the administration projects. And it's right to protest that. I actually think so. To take something like the should the police cooperate with ICE? Um, for all these things, there's a political issue of playing into the hands of the authoritarians and the wannabe dictators. So something like what happened with um, the people barging into the church, that I don't think you have a right to do that. I don't think you have a right to disrupt those kinds of servers. It's a private established. Churches have various kind of legal distinctions, but it's essentially private property. Um, you don't have a right to do that. You should be arrested to do that. And why it plays into the authoritarian hands is like, look, this is what it would be like if ICE wasn't here and if we weren't going after these people. This is what they would be running amok and so on. And so from that perspective, you're playing into their hands. I actually think, like, this is debatable, but I actually think the police in the various states, when they just say we're not cooperating with ICE and so on, that to many Americans looks like, well, isn't that just a different form of lawlessness? I actually think it puts like the state like Minnesota and other Illinois, it puts them on the defensive. And it looks like, oh yeah, ICE cares about the law. And here's these people saying they don't have to follow federal law, but doesn't federal law trump state law and so on. And so again, from sort of Americans looking at this, they might start thinking, well, isn't ICE really the one who cares about the law? And they don't. I think what the states should do is say, we will cooperate with ICE, but on these terms. And then you would put ICE on the defensive. It would be, the terms are, show us that you have warrants for these kinds of things. Show us that you're actually going after and what's your evidence that these are actual criminals? So show us what you're doing to not ensnare citizens and innocent people into all this. And then say, if ICE can't do that, say, well, we're not going to cooperate with a lawless investigation of what ICE is doing. These are the criteria of what you would have to do for us to cooperate. And then ICE would have to say either, yeah, we're doing that, or at least pretend that they're doing that, or they would have to say, no, we don't do any of that. We don't need warrants and so on. And then you would shift it from it's the states that look like we actually care about the law. And I think some of them do. And ICE doesn't. And so there's many forms of, I think, legitimate protest and pushback. But the more the protest and pushback itself looks like it's lawless, you're just playing like that's just wrong. If it really is lawless, that's just wrong. But you also have to think, and you're just helping people think, yeah, maybe something about the administration's message, ICE's message, maybe there is something to it. And you should not do that if you actually care about rule of law.
Okay, let's draw a line there. To our audience, we will include in the show notes links to all the resources that we mentioned today. And as usual, please subscribe, comment, and share this episode if you found it valuable. We'll see you all next week.